Welcome to chapter two. Chapter two is going to focus on family, social, cultural, and religious influences. Um, Truly, we have no universal definition about what a family is. Family was at one time really defined by family members who were either legally tied together or genetically tied together. They had to live in the same household. They had very specific rules. But as our civilization has changed, we really have broadened the definition, um, and therefore we have no universal. So, some general concepts on the family. Again, there's no true universal definition of it. It can be defined, you might have a biological mother and father who are not considered part of your family unit. And you might have an aunt that raised you, and that's perceived as your mother. The newer concepts include communal families, single parent families, homosexual families. Really, whoever's caring for that child becomes part of their family. When we talk about family theories are used to describe how the family unit responds with one another to people outside the family. Each family theory makes an assumption about the family and that they have inherent strengths as well as limitations. Most nurses use a combination of theories in their work with children and families. Um, the common ones are the family system theory, the family stress theory, and the developmental theories. So, your general system theory, this is that the family system in which interactions continually occur among members and between the family unit and the environment. It has an emphasis on interaction. Problems do not lie in any one member, but in the type of interactions used by the family. Um, this makes the family the patient and the focus of the care. Family stress theories. So, we know that when we have a sick child, that we're going to have predictable stressors as well as unpredictable stressors. Predictable stressors on how the parent is able to parent. Unpredictable stressors could be the parent having overwhelming stress, leads to illness, leads to maybe loss of their job. And then we see how the family adapts. And this could require, the help of the medical team when they're in a state of crisis. The developmental theory just basically says that, the family changes over time. As the child grows, the family's semi closed loop system kind of interacts with society in that child's developmental stage. So, as the child goes through their stages of transition, so does the family. So, when I think about this, I think about, mommy and me classes where mom is with other moms with same age children. When they get a little bit older, maybe now we're a soccer family and we go to school age soccer games. And then when the child's in college, now we're a college family. Family structure and function. I include this slide in my traditional class because I teach an associate degree program, and some of my students are not really familiar with all the different types of family structures and functions that exist. So, traditional nuclear family was when we had a mom, a dad, and siblings. The nuclear family is usually composed of two parents and their children. When we talk about blended families, we're looking at maybe a parent with a step parent and then some half siblings. An extended family leads out to aunts, uncles, grandparents, could be adoptive, could be foster. These are beyond just that initial nuclear family. Single parent, very specific. Either we got a mom or a dad, but just one parent. Your bionuclear family refers to parents continuing the parenting role while terminating the spousal unit. So we have one parent and another parent. They no longer are together. They continue to have joint custody. Divorcing parents are both going to have equal rights for that child. This would be joint custody, sometimes referred to as co-parenting. Polygamous family, although not legally sanctioned in the United States, polygamy does still occur. It refers to either, it could be multiple wives, it could be multiple husbands. Many societies practice polygamy. So you could have a child that has multiple parents. Although being that it's not recognized in the United States, if we were having to deal with like consent or something in regards to that, there's only one legal parent. Communal families, again, this is going to be like a compound, multiple people. Um, Communal families may have common religious beliefs, practices, organizations. Um, and again, it's not legal in the United States. We're still going to be looking for that one person that has true legal custody over that child. And then, we have our LGBTQ plus community that can also have children. The children might be genetically theirs, they might be adopted. Um, Again, it's whoever has legal custody of the child, which could sometimes be, adult or child protective services. All right, moving on to our family function. So, really, we need to kind of assess this based on interactions of the family members. We want to identify family characteristics and kind of help that family function effectively. This is going to be an ongoing process for the nurse. You're going to want to see, like, how's this family coping? How are they responding to stressful environments? You might need to give individualized support. You might need to identify appropriate resources for them. When I kind of think about this, I think about how very often we'll see parent A, who is the parent that stays at home, cares for the kids, knows everything about them, but maybe they have 5 kids. And then we have parent B, who's normally the one that goes out, earns a living, brings the money home, and really isn't involved too much into the day-to-day healthcare operations of their child. And then we have that kiddo who gets sick and is at the hospital. Well, parent A might have to stay home and take care of the other children. And now parent B is getting leave from work to be with the child at the hospital. But they might have a hard time coping with that, right? Because this is a really stressful event. They're not in their normal, family unit practice of what they normally do. And they might need a little bit more individualized support because maybe they're not used to setting limits for that kiddo. Maybe they're not used to, how they have to, separate the food on the plate, or that, we can only have juice from the red cup in the afternoon. So lots of support you might need to do. And then appropriate resources. If you have a family who has a child that just got a terminal diagnosis, we might want to put them in contact with pastoral care or therapy services or grief support and things like that. So, family roles and relationships. We have our effective social control, which would be, a family that has really good, strong ties. They really have their roles down. They can function within their roles. They're committed to one another. But then we can also have conflict within that structure where they're not meeting expectations. Maybe the family's not aware of the expectations. Maybe the parent who's staying home to care for the other ones just assumes that the one who goes out to the job is just going to naturally be able to take over at the hospital, and sometimes they can't. Sometimes maybe they're unaware of what expectations are, and that can create a lot of strain in that family structure. So, family roles and relationships, parents and children's. There are so many variations of parental roles that exist in our society. Common things that you hear are like helicopter parents or parents that want to be their kids' friends and their peers, and they just don't have that old traditional parenting. Guidance. Um, so we're not going to go in depth on that because there's a million books in the world that have been published on parental roles and how to do that. Typically, your parental role is kind of used learned through socialization. So it starts when when that parent was a child, and they kind of learned how to be a parent or how not to be a parent, right? If they realized that their parent was a great parent, they might want to emulate that. If they felt their parent was a horrible parent, they're going to want to do anything besides that. There's no, forced family class that teaches somebody how to be a parent. Family size and configuration can also affect the parent role. Sometimes, if we live in an extended family household where we have a parent and a grandparent and a child, the grandparent might take on more of a parental role than the child, and then the actual parent does. Same thing with children. We know that family size alters the child's adjustment to change in crisis. Sometimes, when we have a child that's been an only child for like 5 years, they've always been the center of attention. They've never really had to change. They haven't dealt with much crisis. It's going to be harder for them if they get a little sibling. If we have a sibling at like 2 or 3 years old, although it can be challenging, they're more adjustable to it. If a child's always had change and has always lived in crisis, they're gonna potentially adjust better. And again, like there's books on this, there's tons of stuff on this. It's just one of those things where, if there's 10 kids in the household, there's a lot of change, there's a lot of adjustment. So historically, typically, the children are more used to it. If there's less change, there's less crisis, it can be harder. All right, so now we're moving on to limit setting and discipline. So, discipline is supposed to teach the child rules governing conduct in kind of just a very narrow sense. It refers to action taken to enforce rules after non-compliance. Limit setting refers to establishing the rules and guidelines for behavior. So, an example would be parents can place limits on the amount of time a child can watch television or chat online. The clearer the limits are set and the more consistently they're enforced, the less need there is for disciplinary action. As nurses, we can help parents establish realistic and concrete rules. We can help them with limit setting, use discipline that's positive, and we know that children are going to test their limits. They're going to push for control. This is completely normal part of their development. However, we also know that children thrive better under more structure than without structure. So, misbehaving and minimizing behaviors. So, why do kids misbehave. It can be that they're attention seeking. It can be that they're trying to assert their power. They could just be naturally defiant. Might be that the rules are not clear or the rules are not consistently applied. I talk about that a lot, and I always use the joke of day shift and night shift. But it could be, that two different day shift staff members have a different set of rules, and being that they're not consistently applied, the children could be not truly acting out, but not able to follow how, well, when nurse A is here, I'm allowed to get extra cookies, but when nurse B is here, I'm not allowed to get extra cookies. They're not going to be able to necessarily pair that up depending on where they are developmentally. So they just know yesterday I was able to get extra cookies and today I'm not. So now we're going to act out. How we minimize these behaviors. So, calling attention to it, like you can always start with, I understand that you want cookies, but throwing things is not appropriate. You cannot throw things. Set realistic goals, like I need you to not throw things for the next 4 hours, and then perhaps we can revisit the cookie thing. Teach desired behaviors. I look at this one more so for parents to understand, because very often parents actually do the behaviors that they do not want their children to do. So if you have a parent who's kind of intrusive and loud and they don't really follow normal societal boundaries, they could get aggravated that their child is intrusive and loud and isn't following um, specific boundaries. So sometimes, it's a behavioral thing, and we need to, again, talk and educate the parent. Give advance notice. It's not we're gonna fly off the handle, but we never told them, what they were supposed to do or not supposed to do. Never give false promises, right? So if we have the kid that threw the fit because of the cookies, and then we say, you know what? It's not appropriate for you to act like this. You're not allowed to throw things. I want you to settle yourself down. And, as long as we have no problems for the next 2 or 3 hours, I'll get you the extra cookies, but you need to ask nicely, right? So all of that went well, but now there's no extra cookies. Well, you just gave a false promise, and that's really going to hinder them from listening to you the next time. So next is our implementing the discipline. All right. So when we are disciplining, we need to be consistent. And again, this goes to, if we're talking about at the hospital, it needs to be consistent across all shifts. If we're talking about home, it needs to be consistent across all caretakers. So if we spend time with parent A, parent B, grandparent A, grandparent B, everybody really needs to be consistent. Timing. Discipline needs to be when the action occurs. It does not need to be, hours, weeks, days later. And we also want to make sure that we're avoiding embarrassing the kiddo. Commitment, follow through. If if you do this, you're going to lose your iPad. You have to take that iPad away. You have to follow through, because if you don't, they're just kind of empty. And again, they'll know next time, well, like they're telling me that I need to do this, but the last time, so I'm not going to do it. And that just over time they start to learn. Unity, again, that talks about all caregivers across the family. Everybody needs to be on the same page, understand the same details to prevent confusion and ensure that they have an alliance between what the child's actions are and what the parent wants. Flexibility. Sometimes we have to be flexible. We need to make sure that we're using and choosing strategies that are appropriate to the child's age, to the child's temperament, and to the severity of the misbehavior. With planning, always plan disciplinary strategies in advance and prepare the child if feasible. Behavior orientation, approve of the behavior, not the child. Statements that that was a wrong thing to do. I am unhappy with the behavior I see. Not you were wrong. I'm not happy with you. All right. Privacy. Discipline should be given in private, especially with the older adults or with the older kiddos that feel like they could feel ashamed in front of others. And then termination, after the discipline is administered, we have to consider the child as having a clean state. We don't want to keep bringing up the incident or continuing to lecture them on it. Once it's done, unless they do it again. And then we fall back up into consistency and timing. So, types of discipline. Reasoning. Reasoning involves explaining why an act is wrong, and it's really only appropriate for older children, especially when a moral issue is involved. Younger children really cannot be expected to see something from somebody's other side. Remember, we have egocentrism, which is, they can only see themselves. They cannot empathize. They cannot put themselves in somebody else's shoes. So, reasoning's not really the best for younger ones. Scolding takes the form of shame and criticism, so not the best. Positive and negative reinforcement, probably the most common thing we see, especially in schools, where we do a token system, and as the child does the appropriate action, they earn some type of token. Maybe it's a star, maybe it's a sticker, and then once they get so many tokens, they get a special reward. It could be, a trip, it could be a book, it could be a special, line leading activity in school. Something else that's common in schools could be timeouts. Um, it's just putting them in an area of kind of refrain from other kids in a common place, in a quiet area, to reinforce that the behaviors that they were doing were not appropriate and kind of gives them a little bit of a reset. Ignoring behaviors is really difficult to accomplish. Um, Usually children can outlast an adult on bad behaviors, and therefore, very often the parent will try to ignore it, and then they'll get frustrated and they'll have an outburst that essentially can A, reinforce the negative behaviors, and B, actually lead into more of that corporal physical punishment. I kind of think of like the little kid sitting in the back seat of the car and just kicking the back of the chair, 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 and then the parent like pops off and you know smacks him and says, "Stop kicking the back of the chair." And there was no warning, and all of that stuff. And then corporal punishment or physical punishment would be, when we actually hit the child, which is not recommended at all. So now we're going to go into culture and religion. So culture. Culture is the sum total of mores, traditions, and beliefs about how people function, and encompasses other products of human works and thoughts specific to members of intergenerational groups, communities, and population. Nurses have a responsibility to continually develop cultural competence that includes understanding and respecting influence of culture, race, ethnicity on development of social and emotional relationships, child rearing practices, and attitudes towards healthcare. A child's self concept evolves from ideas about their social roles. Roles are cultural creations, therefore, culture prescribes patterns of behaviors for a person in a variety of social positions. Subculture. So it's important that we understand subculture's influences on child's This includes ethnicity, social economic classes, poverty, homelessness, immigration, religion, school, community, peers, and all of that. And when we think about it, if we have, let's say, a subculture of a lower socioeconomic class, how that could impact their healthcare is maybe they can't afford to go to the physician, maybe they can't afford a medication. And I know some of us instantly might think too, like, well, they could get free child health care. They could get free health care. They still need to be able to get from point A to point B to get to that health care. So do they have a car to get to health care? That's something that in parts of Tennessee we do have issues with, where parents call up and they want to get health care for their kids, but they have no way to get them to the doctor's office. They have no way to get them to the hospital. So that's just a reality of it. Socioeconomic class can also impact their access to food. Are they living in a food desert? Um, do they have access only to a local store that has tons of processed foods? When we look at migrant families, are they concerned about immigration status? So, all of this kind of in itself, in some ways, can influence how they perceive healthcare, how they obtain healthcare, and once they get it, if they follow it. When we look at biocultural influences on healthcare, bicultural influences are when children are exposed to more than one culture at a time. It may occur when we have parents of two different cultures. It may occur in transient families, like those that are military, migrant parents. It could occur in academic settings. It might be intentionally where children are kind of immersed in different programs, or it could be unintentionally due to culture variety of school and different cohorts. Socioeconomic influence on healthcare. So I kind of just touched upon this a little bit, but again, if there's poverty, if they're homeless, if they're falling into that migrant family, transient living or unstable living, where maybe they're bouncing from town to town and they don't have the same doctor. So we're not getting good records and we're not seeing accurate growth and development plottings on their scales. Um, are they able to access healthcare? Once they access it, are they able to utilize it? All of that stuff. Religious influences on healthcare. Um, certain religions have different views on Western medicine. Food customs and symbolisms are various across different cultures, ethnicities, and religious groups. Food can be a very integral part of families' lives. It's really important for nurses and other healthcare providers to be mindful of the meaning of food, eating of food, allowing the families to bring what they need, that it's prepared appropriately. Um, there's a lot of different traditions. And again, you as a nurse do not need to know every custom, every folklore, every religion, every culture. By no means does anybody expect you to know all of that. But you need to be open to learning about your clients' needs when they have it, as well as helping to help them implement it, and then also not imposing your own beliefs. So when we talk about religious beliefs, it could be, their religion, their spirituality, their practices, their beliefs on wellness and on healing, and celebrations. And one common thing that I always see is some of the more specific religions, like Jehovah's Witnesses, who do not celebrate birthdays and Christmases. And you don't want to go in the room of that client and say, Happy birthday, right? Because you're inadvertently not following their religious beliefs and you don't want to create that friction between you and the client and you and the client's family. This is just more health beliefs, right? Again, we are learning Western medicine, but some people follow very natural, holistic, complementary alternatives, folklores, and things like that. So, again, cultural competence. You need to be sensitive, you need to practice relevant to them. And when you're communicating with them, you want to make sure that you're using good verbal communication, be mindful of your nonverbal communication, respect their culture, and ask open-ended questions about it so that you can learn about it and follow their needs. If they need to pray at a certain time of day, make sure that you're not walking in during that and interrupting it. And then also, the more open-ended questions you get and the more information you get, the more you can understand if your healthcare recommendations and treatments are going to be aligned with their cultural beliefs and practices, or maybe not. Falling back on Jehovah's Witnesses, blood transfusions, not part of their cultural beliefs. So you'd have to ask open-ended questions and gain a good sense of, like, we understand that this is your practice, this is our recommendation, and when they say no, then different paths will follow at that point or occur at that point. But make sure that if we can, we follow their health beliefs and practices. So, again, be aware of your own cultural and spiritual beliefs. Practice self regulation to provide effective care. Do not impose your beliefs on somebody else. Increase the cultural competence of your nursing practice. If you live in an area where you know you have a high patient density population of a specific culture, it would benefit you to learn about it, and be an active member of the nursing culture. And that is the end of